We spend a good part of the first act of these stories learning what a terrible human being our main character is. Sometimes they're so loathsome we wonder why we're reading or watching this at all. Then, across the journey our astute storyteller takes us on, we learn what it means to grow and learn and the price to pay for our past. Let's talk about redemption arcs. I'm author DC Fergerson, and this is the Worldbuilding Dojo. Before we get started, I am so excited to show this off. Behold, the cover for Fated Alliance, Book 6 of the Dragon's Dream Saga. This handsome tome is dropping this Tuesday, May 25th. Stay tuned at the end, too, because you get a preview of the first chapter of Book 7 as well. Full of action, twists, turns, and the wild world where magic and technology are at odds with each other. Get the latest tale in the Dragon's Dream Saga. For real. Look at it. So cool. Get it. So first a big shout out to Gunsong1 who requested this video, and who doesn't love a good redemption arc? What's so great about these arcs is that they're strong enough to stand alone as the basis for your entire story, but they can also be compacted as a subplot for a side character. As we're going to see, it's also extremely flexible, going from one genre to the next without skipping a beat. That begs the question, what is redemption exactly? What makes up a redemption arc? Well, by definition, redemption is an action of being saved or saving oneself from sin, error, or evil. You could easily put lawlessness in there too. Basically, our character starts bad and makes good. This is a classic theme going back to even before the Greek plays, and once again turning to our ancient bros, this is a lesson for all of us put into art form. It tells us that no matter what you've done, there's a path to walk it back and make it right. That doesn't always mean you get a happy ending. Sometimes our character can be so bad for so long that the only way back is to sacrifice themselves. When it's done like that, it's often payment for what they've done, or also a selfless act on behalf of someone else, or an ideal. This gets pretty heavy, and we're going to get into that. First, we want to understand that motivation is the key factor here. We're not telling a redemption story when we talk about a low-level thug that turns criminal informant to save his own skin. While ratting out the evil that the character works for could be a step in the right direction, saving their hide is not the motivation of someone beginning a redemption arc. For that, we need an epiphany. Epiphany is this wonderful moment when our character in a redemption arc realizes what the audience has known all along. They're on the wrong side. Sometimes the epiphany is quick and sudden, like Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones. The second that Joffrey's body hits the ground, Tyrion knows he's on the wrong side. He gets blamed, imprisoned, his own sister accuses him of the murder, his father presides over the trial, and all of it's rigged against him. What follows we're going to touch on in a little bit, but first we need to switch over to another type of Eureka moment. And for that, we're going to go to the first deep cut this week, and that's the 1998 drama American History X, starring Edward Norton. Now, I can't even say that much about his character. Let's just say that he belonged to a very particular hate group that doesn't like having hair. What I can say is that his dedication to this cause is unwavering. He's one of the hardcore believers, right up until the moment he takes it too far and lands in prison. He is such a despicable character from the outset of this movie that it really seems impossible that any one moment is going to change him. So it doesn't. Instead, the film shows a series of progressive moves forward that he makes while in prison that begin to make him change his mindset. It's a slow burn, and it is equally useful to understand. People like Edward Norton's character in this film are zealots. There is no way that you undo years upon years of dedicated belief with any one single event. This is important to keep in mind because you want to consider the character you're changing while telling the story. I need to see, hear, and feel the shift coming from this character. Tyrion was already an educated, open-minded fellow. He wasn't blind to the sins and suffering his family caused, but he also knew he wasn't going to change the world all by himself, so he went along for the ride. It was when the guns turned on him that he realized these people are so corrupt, such a den of snakes, that they turn on their own blood. So he stakes out to become a revolutionary. This isn't a hard sell to me as a reader. I'd spent enough time with Tyrion's character to understand the moment that he flipped the switch, and it felt natural. With idealism, especially when it's at the center of one's lifestyle, the ego cannot bear challenges like that. You can see it in his face when he's arrested here. There isn't remorse for what he's done. The harm and damage he's caused is secondary to being the living embodiment of this broken ideal. And so it goes. It takes time and lessons to chip away at this foundation before it can be rebuilt. It's so important to consider this when plotting redemption, because for the transition to feel natural, we must determine how much this person is embedded in the darkness. We can't just throw open the windows and show them the bright sun. Like a vampire, they'll flee from the light. If you picture it like that, then the darker the room is, the slower we open the blinds. Now that our character has realized the error of their ways, they must start taking steps down this road to redemption. The thing is, I can't tell you exactly what's right for your story. The path your character takes is going to depend on so many factors. The nature of their crime or sin, what redemption looks like in your world and with your society, what made them change their mind, and how it feels to your audience. To be honest, I can't think of a more perfect example of this confusion in action than our next deep cut, the 1996 court drama Sleepers, based on a book of the same name. I'd still say watch the film, though, as it stars Jason Patric, Brad Pitt, Robert De Niro, and Kevin Bacon. You don't mess up with a cast like that. Sleepers is about a lawyer that is approached by his childhood friend. He tells him that the other two members of their crew from when they were kids are now up on murder charges. Our lawyer is like, no way, but then he finds out that the man that they killed was a guard at the juvenile penitentiary from when they were children. Huge chunks of the story are fed to us in flashback, and what we learn is that these four boys ended up in prison for a freak accident, but what happened to them in jail at the hands of the guards was beyond any crime they could have committed. Now, in the present day, the question is whether breaking the law is the morally right thing to do. I have to say, this movie is extremely divisive, and you should watch it. It's easy to look at the plot analysis and formulate an opinion, but actually watching this journey, I can say that there's a good argument to be made that at the end of this film, you're not really sure whether they were right or wrong. But that's what you want when you tell a tale like this. We muddy the water so much between right and wrong, and then show you where the chips fall, and leave you to decide how you feel about it. Is this a great redemption story or a travesty of justice? Is this morally right or is it wrong? Like I said, there are really good arguments for either one here. How this relates to us is that we can tell a redemption arc however we want in terms of the path taken. Like a recovering addict, there may even be relapse into their dark ways along the road. Take, for example, Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, another redemption story, this time a comedy. If you watch the trajectory of this story, he actually starts trying to off himself long before he ever tries to make himself a better person. Take that in for a second. It's a black comedy, yeah, but there's a lot to unpack there. He grows so tired of the rut that he tries to end his life in a variety of ways before even teaching himself how to play the piano or making a real friend. In the end, though, these characters are trying to redeem themselves for the wrong they've done. And yes, they get points for trying. That isn't to say it's all roses from here on out. Quite the opposite, in fact. Every redemption usually has a price. We can't really discuss the concept of a good redemption arc without showing that there is always a cost, a price to be paid for this redemption. What struck me as funny as I was preparing for this episode is that a lot of people seem to think that the film Logan is a redemption story. I mean, I think even the writers did, because it's written like one, and it ends like one. In this film, our aging Wolverine cares for a dying Professor X in a world where mutants have all but been exterminated. Its setting is almost dystopian. Hiding from the rest of the world, a young girl breezes into their lives possessing the same abilities as Logan. She may even be his clone. This girl needs to get free, to a sanctuary where mutants like her won't be hunted. In the end, Logan sacrifices himself to give her her freedom, the final end of the most iconic X-Men character that was ever in print or film. The thing is, Wolverine is doing the Clint Eastwood thing this entire movie, being a curmudgeon and a loner, old and cranky, with a vicious, dark, and brooding past. Thing is, we know Wolverine as the X-Man that has done the most to try and save the world in all of these films. So the idea that he still has something to make up for is a very tough pill to swallow. It'd be like trying to make a redemption story out of Gandalf as a sequel to Lord of the Rings, making up for some flaming pinecone prank gone wrong when he was a young man, ignoring the fact that he already helped save the world. Now, since we did mention Clint Eastwood, let's talk about that, which brings us to a not-so-deep cut, the 2008 film Gran Torino. In this one, Eastwood is a grouchy, kind of racist old man living in his home after his wife has passed. The neighborhood has diversified significantly since he bought his house, and now he feels like an outcast in his own home. When an immigrant family moves in next door, he hires their son to do work as recompense for some damages. Begrudgingly, he forms a bond with the kid, even as he sees that a local gang is eyeing him for forced initiation. In the end, our grouchy old man redeems himself in a sacrifice to the ideal of giving this kid a future. If you're familiar with Eastwood's past work in films like Dirty Harry and Unforgiven, you're just waiting until he sucks down a bottle of whiskey and turns into a one-man killing machine against the whole gang, but it never comes. Grounded in realism, the ending is a bittersweet reckoning, where he gives this kid a future that's believable. Sacrificing yourself for the good ideal is very common in redemption arcs. Sometimes, though, there's a fate far worse than death awaiting our character. As we mentioned earlier, the film American History X does a spectacular job of this. Do you believe that this cold-hearted hate-monger could go to jail, do his time, and be a changed man without his past sins catching up with him? Of course not. But it takes the form of his little brother that idolized him. Fresh out of prison, he finds the boy is almost a man and following in his brother's footsteps. As he tries to save him, the same thing happens that I mentioned earlier. His little brother is so entrenched in this ideal that he dismisses this softer brother that came out of prison to uphold the memory of the one he idolized. And our hero can't save him. There are some serious Shakespearean overtones to this film without ever getting preachy, and it doesn't shelter you from the darkness. Unlike me, who had to go the extra mile of censoring this work of art so that I don't get my video critiquing it taken down. So yeah, there's that. In any case, the lesson here is that there's a price to be paid for going with the angels. There's always the risk that your past comes back to haunt you. And we see that in last week's example, Cruel Intentions, of itself a kind of redemption story, but there's one chink in the armor that takes it out of the category in my opinion. What Sebastian does to redeem himself in Cruel Intentions is done out of love, not because he doesn't like who he was before. And that brings us to one final cautionary tale. So, fair warning before we board this train. I'm about to roast a sacred cow like it's a barbecue. The funny thing is, I actually quite like this story and have enjoyed the innumerable times it's been redone. So, let's talk about the classic A Christmas Carol. It's a story I'm certain we're all familiar with, so let's get right to dissecting it. But DC, this is a beloved story. How can it possibly be a bad example if it's so widely loved? Oh, my precious guy who talks to your monitor. Nothing is above criticism. Not you, not me, not Dickens. Here's the two things about A Christmas Carol that we take issue with here. The first is that its wide success means we can't ever do this three ghosts thing or something even vaguely derivative without getting a comparison. And that's rude because this is not an original idea at all. It's Greek, going back to the Three Fates. It's been done in Shakespeare and so on. And now you can't do it because Christmas. So thanks a lot, Dickens. The really big issue with this story, though, is it's part of a bigger rule it's breaking, which is for all the cool genres that you can put redemption into, from fantasy to comedy to drama, we really do not want it within 10 feet of a time travel narrative. Again, comparisons, sure, but there's more to it than that. Ebenezer Scrooge is visited by three ghosts. The first one shows the sins of his past, and he makes excuses, he justifies, he argues with the spirit even. He doesn't care. He's visited by the ghost of the present, and he feels a pang of sympathy for Tiny Tim and Bob's family, but he still makes excuses and justifies himself. And then we get to this epiphany moment. In the future, a death with no mourners, followed by an eternity of darkness in the abyss. That isn't really redemption. Ebenezer Scrooge does not pay for what he's done, and an easy argument can be made that this bright new sense of generosity is more akin to buying his way into heaven with good deeds. Think about it. If you could be shown the future and the terrible long-term consequences of a mistake you're going to make tomorrow, would you do anything different? Of course you would. We all would. And in this, Scrooge does not earn his redemption at all. Actually, quite counter to another Christmas Carol, he's not being good for goodness sake. He's desperate to avoid the future he's seen. In many of our films that we cited today, these characters are visited by someone in their lives that tells them, you can't keep going down this path. And the character internalizes that message and chooses to make the change for themselves in their own time. This doesn't happen with Scrooge. He's literally shown the outcome of disregarding the advice and becomes a changed man, which he's basically doing with a gun to his head. So it's important to keep this in mind when you set out on your redemption arcs. You want to make it feel earned, and the road walked is hard. There's a price to be paid, and most important, avoid time travel. Whether it's supernaturally through a spirit granting a vision of the future, or our heroes step into a time-traveling phone booth, don't try to make it a redemption story. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is another weird one, now that I mention it, because the only reason they had to pass their exams was because their future self sent someone back to make sure that they did so the future could happen, which is actually a causal time loop. And, wait, you know what? Just go back and watch Let's Time Travel, or I'm going to go off on a rant here. Redemption arcs, whether comedic or dramatic, can be exquisitely entertaining to watch. It stirs something deep within us, an ancient lesson that it's never too late to atone for the sins of our past. The journey is often every bit as satisfying as the destination, and we leave with a feeling that even if everything isn't wrapped in a neat bow, maybe that's okay too. Once again, the donations from you guys are so awesome, and I thank you so much. We're still working with the Boston-based Needs organization to get this beautiful lady a service dog. Her name is Liana. She's 11 and on the spectrum. This wonderful person is my little girl, and if you'd like to help out, there's a link in the comments below. Also, while you're down there, don't forget to sign up for my newsletter, and you're going to get Cora Blake, Arcane Agent, totally free. You'll get cool news about what I'm working on in books and here on the channel, and it comes loaded with cool authors and promotions for fantasy and sci-fi. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear about new videos, and as always, I'm DC Fergerson. Now have fun and get crafting.